from that.
How secure do you think Sir Norman Fowler is as chairman of the Conservative Party since he's sitting here?
Well, we've heard all this talk from the Liberal Democrat side about how previous by-election victories at Eastbourne toppled Mrs Thatcher, at Ribble Valley toppled the poll tax, that Newbury got rid of Norman Lamont. Now, some are arguing that if the Liberal Democrats have won as well as they say in Christchurch, the victim might be VAT on fuel. Sir Norman says there's no question of that policy being changed, so he's now the chief lightning conductor for the Prime Minister. I suppose possibly he could be seen as another alternative scapegoat.
Thank you, Robin.
Do you think you're going to hold your job?
I think that all Conservative chairmen, assuming that we've lost this, do have the position of defending when we've lost by-elections. Happens to all my predecessors, Cecil Parkinson, Chris Patten. The interesting thing is, however, of course, and this is what you really need to, I think, remember as we now watch this scene, is that we have always come back to win the general election following.
Max Hastings, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, I see, says that they should have somebody more robust, better at cheering people up than you, and names Nicholas Soames as the person who ought to lead the chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, is that what?
Well, I haven't seen the article, and I don't think we're in that speculation business at the moment.
Well, we're not speculating for much longer on the result, I hope, of Christchurch either, because down there the Liberal Democratic candidate is standing, checking, I think, the figures that she's got. That's Diana Maddock, just looking at the figures they're given to them by the returning officer, so they can complain or not as they see. While we're waiting for this result to come through, I think it will now only be a matter of minutes. Peter Kellner, could you just perhaps tell us what to look out for in terms of swing, and how centre parties have done in terms of swing in recent by-elections? What sort of scale of Liberal Democratic or centre party vote there is?
Well, if we look at the big victories by the centre candidates, Liberals or SDP or now Liberal Democrats in the last 10 years, we do see a clear trend, starting off with the Portsmouth South in 1984, which Mike Hancock won, with a 14% swing from Conservative to SDP, and Richard Livesey a year later, Brecon and Radnor, a 16% swing, Elizabeth Shields a year after that at Rydale, an 18% swing. Now, if we move on to the 1987 Parliament, and then the by-election at Eastbourne, the Robins just referred to, a 20% swing to the Liberal Democrats. And in Ribble Valley, it moved up to 25%. Now, the one breaking this pattern is at Kincardine, where the swing was only 11%, but that was because the Liberal Democrats started from a very much higher base, and it would have been, I think, absurd to expect the same sort of stratospheric swing. And then Newbury, just a couple of months ago, a 28% swing. And incidentally, tonight, if we were to match the Newbury swing, if the Liberal Democrats were to achieve a 28% swing, we'd be looking for something like an 8,000 majority. So anything above an 8,000 majority at Christchurch means that the swing is greater than at Newbury, and then we really are into record-breaking levels.
I mean, record-breaking is 32.5, roughly, isn't it? Which is the swing in 1972 at Sutton and Cheam.
Sutton and Cheam and Graham.
That's the biggest since the war.
That was the biggest
swing
in the Conservative seat from Conservative to centre. Although again, it must be said that Graham Tope started from a lower base than Diana Maddock is starting in Christchurch. So if she were to match that Sutton and Cheam swing, it would actually be a more significant and a more statistically a more substantial achievement. But I think the interesting thing is the way those swings have grown. Now, it's true, as Norman Fowler was saying, that all those seats are now back in Conservative hands. Everyone except Brecon went back at the following general election. Brecon took a couple of general elections to go back. Those have never given clear indications of a real national breakthrough. But never before, certainly in the last 10 years, have we had the kind of swings we've seen at Newbury, and it looks tonight at Christchurch. So to that extent, we're away from these sort of 14, 16, 18, 20% swings that we're fairly familiar with. We do seem to be in much greater swing territory. And I think it's an open question as to whether we'll see just as big a swing back at Newbury and at Christchurch the next general election as we saw a swing back after Portsmouth South or Rydale or Eastbourne.
So the suggestion is that it's possible that there is, perhaps we could lose that picture now, because I've now lost following it. But thank you. No, it's only that it's a very nice description, but prefer to see you. In terms of volatility, what you're really saying is that people are, as I said at the very beginning of this programme, they're getting more used to demonstrating against a government that they've just elected and complaining and protesting.
Well, it's two
and
things.
that seems to be what
in
it
some
is.
of the most recent by-elections, like Ribble Valley and like Newbury, the Conservative vote has fallen more sharply than in other by-elections. But also, we're seeing a greater degree of tactical voting. The reason why the swing was that bit more modest in Portsmouth South and at Brecon was because the Labour vote was actually held up rather well there, because it wasn't clear that the Labour vote was going to be squeezed. What we've had in Ribble Valley, in Newbury, now in Christchurch, is the Labour vote, the residual Labour vote, being cracked right down to infinitesimal levels. So you've had the Conservative vote falling very sharply, and the Labour vote being squeezed, and the Liberal Democrats just cleaning up in the middle.
Are you surprised, Robin, and would you think Labour should be alarmed that its vote has been squeezed like this, when it was so clear that the Liberal Democrats were way out ahead? You'd expect Labour supporters perhaps to stay with Labour.
Yes, I think it must be worrying for Labour that their vote has collapsed as badly as this, given all that Jack Straw was saying earlier. And I agree with him that Labour has put in quite a lot of good opposition in the House of Commons, has fought very effective campaigns against Tory party funding, the sleaze factor in national government, good campaign on law and order and so on. Also did well in the Shire County elections. Labour's now ruling places that it hasn't ruled for 100 years. And there we're faced with a by-election which from day one has been written about and broadcast about in the media as being something that Conservatives couldn't possibly hold. We've seen huge national opinion poll swings showing that the Liberal Democrats were going to win it. In those circumstances, Labour supporters knew that they didn't actually need to go across and vote tactically for the Liberal Democrats, and so if feeling was running as strongly for the Labour Party as Jack is indicating, they could perfectly well have kept up a respectable vote for Labour in this by-election.
But they didn't know that, Robin, and they don't know it. And I think you've genuinely failed to you misunderstand the psychology of a bandwagon. I was very heavily involved in Ribble Valley, it's bang next door to my constituency. On the day, I'm damn sure, I know for certain, that I was taking Labour Party members to the polls who then voted Liberal Democrat. And I don't blame them. They wanted to be part of an historic sweeping away of the Tory party, and they saw the only way of doing it there was by voting Liberal Democrat. Exactly, yes, that seems to have happened.
But is it the only way here when they can,
exactly,
when they've seen polls demonstrating that the Liberal Democrats are so far ahead?
I'm saying the psychology of it, from an individual point of view, is they want to be part of that action of sweeping away the Tory party.
Matthew Taylor, what do you think the psychology of a bandwagon is?
Well, I mean, when people want to vote out of government, they'll do so in huge numbers. And I mean, the Conservative Party can't dismiss this because this is record-breaking stuff. But in terms of what Jack is saying, it simply isn't true that in the past we've seen this in by-elections. The fact is that were it not for Newbury, if Labour has lost their deposit in this election, were it not for Newbury, that would be the worst result for the Labour Party in any by-election since the 1920s. It will be the second worst result for the Labour Party in any by-election since the 1920s. You can't simply dismiss that as if it's just the same old thing. It clearly
Let's just
isn't.
have a quick look at the count there, because we're waiting for what may be a record-breaking result. And there are the candidates. I suspect that's by the national newspaper party on the left, the Sunday Sport, and the Highlander for Wednesday Promotion Night party next, and then the Alfred Chicken party, and all the others, and the candidates of the three main parties hidden away to the right there, looking very cheerful, considering the defeat he's alleged to have had. Rob Hayward, the Conservative Party candidate there, just hidden behind the poster, and to his right, Diana Maddock for the Liberal Democrats, standing there. So they're waiting, and I think in a minute or two we'll actually have the returning officer come up and give this result. In fact, I can't think why there's this delay, because unless there's some check being made on... They must have done... You know the way they do these things. They must have finished all their work, mustn't they now?
It's traditional. They always have this delay to annoy you.
I think it's just to annoy us. Mr. Keith, annoy you, actually. Keep it here. We're quite happy. Mark, what's happening down there in Christchurch?
No, anything less than going from
Mark
100%.
Mark Mardell down in Christchurch. What's happening?
Yes, I am down. I think
Yes, I know you're down there.
And they're going to be announcing the result very shortly. We understand that, yes, it is indeed a record-breaking swing, 35.4. A majority of just over 16,000, I believe, is going to be announced. And, of course, all the Liberal Democrat team are absolutely delighted. One of them was just... They're delighted with the result, and we're going to hear that very shortly.
The returning officer, I think, is just coming to the platform. So let's... There is the returning officer checking. I don't know whether the... Well, there's the by the Daily Sport Party candidate, maybe checking what vote she got. And they seem to be doing a bit of organising here. I don't know whether they're nervous of demonstration. There was a rumour that buy the Daily Sport Party candidate might reveal why you should buy the Daily Sport in front of our cameras. No reason to suppose she's not going to behave with total decorum. So, the second by-election of this Parliament, a Tory majority of over 23,000, a very safe Conservative seat in Dorset, people who've been lifelong Tory voters, a prosperous area, a place where the retired go and buy bungalows that cost £100,000 or so each by the sea, and it looks as though the voters there are going to give the second bloody nose of this Parliament to the Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please receive the returning officer, the High Sheriff for Dorset, who will precede the candidates for the declaration.
Ladies and gentlemen, election of a member to serve in Parliament for the Christchurch County constituency. Declaration of result of poll. I, Richard Guy Grosvenor de Pele, High Sheriff of Dorset, the returning officer at the election of a member to serve in Parliament for the Christchurch County constituency, held on the 29th of July, 1993, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the said election is as follows. Bannon, Andrew Patrick Peter, 357 votes.
Down as the Conservative candidate. They're not the real Conservative candidate.
Jackson Tara, 67 votes.
By the Daily Sport Party.
Belcher Mark Duncan, 23 votes.
Ian for King Party.
Crockard John Pearson, 48 votes.
Highlander for Wednesday Promotion Night Party.
Fitzhugh Carl, 18 votes.
The Alfred Chicken Party.
Griffiths Mark Roderick Francis, 45 votes.
The Natural Law Party candidate.
Hayward Robert Anthony, 16,737 votes.
Official Conservative Party candidate.
Holliman Peter Anthony, 60 votes.
Save the National Health Service candidate.
Lickley Nigel James Dominic, 1,453 votes.
The Labour Party candidate.
Maddock Diana, 33,000.
That, of course, is the Liberal Democratic Party candidate,
164
Diana
votes.
Maddock.
Newman Peter Grant, 80 votes.
The Sack Graham Taylor Party, the English football manager.
Sked Allen, 878 votes.
The Anti-Maastricht Anti-Federalist League getting almost half the Labour vote, over half the Labour vote.
Such Lord David, 404 votes.
Monster Raving Loony Rock Roll Party.
Wally John Rafe, 16 votes.
The Rainbow Alliance candidate.
And I do hereby declare that the said Diana Maddock is duly elected as Member of Parliament for the said constituency. Thank you very much.
So there's the result of the Christchurch by-election. The Liberal Democrats take it. They overturn a majority of 23,000 for the Tories to get a majority of 16,500. The Liberal Democrats candidate, Diana Maddock, 33,164. Rob Haywood for the Conservatives dropped to 16,737 from the 36,500 that Robert Adley got. Labour's 1,453, and the majority 16,000, and the swing 35%, a record swing, I think probably ever against a government. Let's just hear now from the victor.
My predecessor, Robert Adley, was widely regarded, and he had a 23,000 majority. Never before has that majority been overturned. But Robert Adley was an independent MP. He was not afraid to tell the government when they were wrong. And that is what the people of Christchurch and East Dorset have done tonight. They have told the government that they have got it wrong, and they have sent them a very powerful message, which I think they will ignore at their peril. Mr. Major, if you are out there listening tonight, and I hope you are listening, the people of this constituency have said no to VAT on fuel and no to underfunding in our schools. And no to underfunding of our health service. And they have said yes to more policemen on the streets and yes to tackling crime. Mr. Major, that is the message from Christchurch and East Dorset, and they want you to listen tonight. Their message to you is very simple. Change your policies or change your job. The people here have placed you on probation. The people of Britain at the general election may not be so lenient. Can I thank everybody who has made tonight possible? The returning officers here, all the people who've counted the votes, all those people who get up so early to work in the polling stations. For the police and the extra presence we had here today. And can I thank all my opponents? It was a very clean campaign. And can I thank particularly my agent, Willie Rennie, the fantastic campaign team we had, and the hundreds of people that have come here to support us. And of course, I must thank my family, mainly for supporting me, but I have to say for putting up with all of this as well. But most of all, of course, I want to thank all the people of Christchurch and East Dorset who've put their trust in me and voted for me today. I promise to listen to you, to work with you, to be a strong voice for you in Parliament, and to do it to the very best of my ability. Thank you very much, everyone.
Diana Maddock, the new MP for Christchurch, for the Liberal Democrats, having achieved the biggest swing against a government in a by-election and the biggest fall in the Conservative vote ever recorded in a by-election. Let's just have a look at the scale of the victory that she had. There are the raw figures, the swing 35%, a majority of 16,500 for Diana Maddock. Previously, Robert Adley had a majority of 23,000. And this is the share of the vote as recorded today. Remember those figures we had earlier in the programme? That's how it looks from today in Christchurch. 62% for the Liberal Democrats, 31% for the Conservatives, 3% for Labour, who lose their deposit, and whose vote was only just about 1,500, 1,453, and the others on 4%. And the change since the April 92 general election, the Liberal Democrats go up 39%, the Conservatives go down 32%, and Labour down 9%. So a triumph for the Liberal Democrats, celebrating down in Christchurch, less of a triumph for Sir Norman Fowler, chairman of the Conservative Party. Sir Norman, the largest fall in the Conservative vote ever, and the largest swing against a government ever.
No, it's a bad result. There's no question about that. It's a very bad result indeed. And from our point of view, extremely disappointing. And the first thing I would like to say is that Rob Hayward, down there, fought a very good campaign, and I'm very disappointed as far as he's concerned. I mean, I think the voters of Christchurch have clearly been affected by a number of factors. I think one of those factors was the coming out, the slow coming out of the recession. I think that the example of disunity inside the party hasn't, frankly, done us any good, although that's now behind us, but I think that has not done us any good. I think united we win, disunited we tend not to. That's a lesson for us in the future. But I think the other lesson is that we have got to get our message over, our policies over, more positively, more directly to the public.
What are you going to say to the Prime Minister?
Well, I don't intend to rehearse with you what I intend to say to the Prime Minister.
Well, would you rehearse with me the kind of advice you think the Prime Minister should be receiving as a result of this? Changes in policy? Changes in people?
No, certainly not that. What I think is what has happened in this by-election, and what in a sense happened at Newbury as well, has been a result of a number of factors which have gone back, the recession and the internal dispute within the Conservative Party during the Maastricht debate, happily now behind us. I think what we now have to do is to more positively put our policies over. We need to develop policies like law and order. I believe that the recession is now coming to an end. The recovery will now come through much more clearly. I think, obviously, the whole Conservative Party will wish to look at this, but this is not a time remotely for losing our nerve as far as all these things are concerned. We will obviously consider and think and act upon the result here.
Matthew Taylor, is that the kind of response you were hoping to get when you were saying to people, vote Liberal Democrat and send a protest to John Major at number 10?
Well, at this point, after Newbury and the county election results, we heard exactly the same thing, but the Chancellor was gone very shortly afterwards. Let's wait and see what the reaction to this is. I think it's going to burn very hot for the Prime Minister over this summer politically. I think that his future is in certain doubt. After all, what have we seen in this Parliament so far? Just a year into the government, we've seen the two best by-election results ever in history for the Liberal Democrats, combined with the best ever county election results. We've seen the two worst ever results for the Conservative Party in by-elections, and incidentally we've also seen the two worst ever results for the Labour Party in by-elections, two results that haven't been seen since the 1920s for the Labour Party, quite appalling results for them. And I think that that is a measure of where people are. They want a change of leadership style, they want some leadership. They want a change in policy, and if the government doesn't deliver it to it, they can expect to continue to see these kind of losses, I believe. And when they are looking for an alternative, I think that there's been a very decisive move the Liberal Democrats, one where we're moving upwards. We're glad to be moving upwards, and clearly our job is to continue to do that and to build support for our position and our party in the long term.
Jack Straw, I may interrupt you if the winning candidate reaches Mark Mardell, because we'd like to hear from her, but 2 lost deposits running, Newbury and now Christchurch.
It's not a problem for us. These 2 seats, it just happens almost by chance, well, entirely by chance, that the first 2 by-elections to be fought in this Parliament were in seats.
I'm going to stop you, as I said I would. We'll come back to you in a second. Let's
Okay.
go straight down and hear from the victor at Christchurch. Mark.
Diane Maddock, congratulations, first of all. What do you think will happen now? You said the Prime Minister has to listen. What particular policies do you want him to change?
I think overwhelmingly what people want to see changed is VAT on fuel. That is the big issue, the thing that they want to see done away with.
Well, you heard Sir Norman say yesterday that that would not change, and also that he said it tonight on our programme, that policy will not change.
He's said a lot of things before, and so have the Conservative Party. Their list of broken promises brought a huge overturning of the majority tonight. And I think if they don't listen, the same thing will happen in the general election. They won't tell you tonight they're going to do it, but they've got some thinking to do if they want to win back the confidence of the electorate.
Now, because if they win back the confidence of the electorate, you would lose this seat. I don't want to cast a pall over what's a historic evening for you, but isn't that what's going to happen realistically?
Well, tonight we have seen the biggest swing against the government since the war, against the Tory government. I think there's tremendous result for the Liberal Democrats. It's the biggest turnaround we've seen since the war. And I think that the government will have to listen to what is going on. And I think that they won't worry when it comes to the general election. People will see that if they change their views, maybe they will change it, but I don't think they will.
You think they will stick with you?
We had an opinion poll recently, and people said that they were sticking with us. People who've said, I've voted Conservative for 40 years and I'm unlikely to change.
I've talked to a lot of people in this constituency over the last 3 weeks, but I'm sure you've talked to an awful lot more. What is the mood? Is it just a feeling that the government's been going through a bad patch, as they are admitting?
I think they've lost faith in government. They don't trust them anymore. They think they've been dishonest. But I also think they've been looking for a positive alternative. We have campaigned on positive issues, fair taxation, decent funding for our schools and hospitals, protecting our environment, and making sure that people can walk safely on the streets by getting more policemen back on the streets.
Now, Rob Hayward, in his speech just now, said that it's easy to make promises without saying where the money is going to come from, an accusation that's been levelled at you throughout the campaign.
We have been perfectly straight and honest with the electorate. We have said, if you want these services, you have to pay for them. We've asked them in meeting after meeting, if at the end of the day, that means that you have to put more on income tax. We think that is the fair way to do it, not VAT, which attacks the sick and the vulnerable. And every time we've asked, people agree that if at the end of the day, that's the way it has to be paid for, they're prepared to do it.
So you think in a place like this, which is prosperous, innately Conservative with a small c, people would be willing to pay higher income tax?
They would rather pay fair taxes than have VAT put on fuel that actually hits those who can least afford to pay.
Diana Maddock, thank you very much indeed.
Mark Mardell down there in Christchurch, and he'll now be looking, I've no doubt, for Rob Hayward, the defeated Conservative candidate, and we'll hear from him as soon as he comes to our camera. In the meantime, Jack, I hope we get a better run this time. I started by saying 2 lost deposits for Labour, and you said that didn't matter.
Yeah, I said it wasn't a
Or
problem
words
for us.
to that effect.
Yes, I said it happens to be.
Cost you £500.
As a matter of, well, I think we can probably manage that. As a matter of chance, that the first 2 by-elections have taken place in this Parliament have each been in seats where we started from an extremely low base. And there was a very high level of tactical voting. There's no doubt that the voters have become more sophisticated. This was an annihilation for the Tory party. It's a very, very serious defeat. I congratulate the Liberal candidate, by the way. It was a by-election where we did set the agenda, one issue after another. On VAT, well, we did. On VAT, on fuel, for example.
And you lost your deposit.
John Smith was in there straight away. We did set it on VAT, on fuel. Within half an hour of Norman Lamont making that pledge, John Smith had the political sense to understand just what a disaster that was, and to go in, and we have set the agenda. That weekend, the weekend straight after the budget, we were out, the Liberals weren't, with petitions on VAT on fuel. So we did on that, we did it on railway privatisation, on Maastricht, on the economy generally, and the chaos in the government as well. And the interesting paradox about this election is really brought out by that gaffe of Peter Brook, that the consequence of this Liberal win is to hasten the day of the general election because it cuts the Conservatives' majority by 2, and on any likely swing at the general election with this level of unpopularity, we would be the victors at that general election, and
Right.
correctly.
Incidentally, I should have mentioned the majority. It's down, it was 18 after Robert Adley's death. The government's majority is now down to 17. Robin Oakley, you said at the beginning that you thought that this by-election had been written off by the backbenchers of the Tory party, by the Prime Minister, on the grounds that they expect it had been a bad run and they expected to lose it. Given the scale of this defeat, would you modify that view, or do you still hold to it?
Well, I don't think there will be any dire and immediate consequences, partly because MPs aren't around in the Westminster hothouse to get together and cabal and to discuss it and to produce the more extreme reactions. Most have now gone off on their holidays, and that's one reason why the government staged this by-election at this time. Certainly, I think there will be an effect on the potential Tory rebels on the question of VAT on fuel. That has been a key issue both at the Newbury by-election and at the Christchurch by-election. The government is still to bring forward in the autumn its package of compensation measures for pensioners and those who will be hardest hit. Tory backbenchers who know how to use their power in these days of government with small majority will drive a pretty hard bargain on that question if they can't persuade the government to alter the VAT on fuel policy in some way.
How many backbenchers are there who are prepared to fight on that score?
Difficult to tell. I mean, we've seen about 8 or 9 come into the open previously on this issue. I think that number will now probably increase. The government was able to get its finance bill votes through on this issue, but I think it will have a tougher time getting the rest of that policy through.
Don't they have the cushion of the Ulster Unionists now to get them through any tricky votes, so that the dissent on the Tory backbenchers is countered by the Ulster Unionists?
We'll have to wait and see how effective that pact proves to be on crucial votes, and it may cost the government further concessions in time to come.
Peter Kellner, briefly, we're waiting to go down to Rob Hayward. As soon as he's got his microphone on there, we'll go over there. What's your analysis of this in terms of the destructive force for the Tory party?
I think the only thing that can save the Tory party in the short run is the fact that the summer holidays are coming up. If it weren't for that, I think that the chain of events that would follow in terms of what it does to the public moods, to nationwide opinion polls, to the reaction back at Westminster, I think would be disastrous. But if I were in Norman Fowler's position, I would not take comfort in that. These are terrible results for the Tories, even by the standards of Eastbourne or Ribble Valley or Brecon and Radnor. This is a ghastly result, and I think Norman Fowler should be asking himself, why have Christchurch and Newbury been so much worse than the mid-term by-elections in 81, in 85, in 90? Because until he can answer that question satisfactorily, and I don't think it is just about presentation, I think it does go much deeper, and I think he's got some very serious questions he needs to ask himself and to discuss with the Prime Minister.
Well, at Christchurch yesterday, a Conservative vote for Robert Adley of 36,627 fell to 16,737, and the luckless Conservative candidate Robert Hayward is now with Mark Mardell down at Christchurch. Mark.
Rob, everybody said that you fought a very good, strong campaign. You were an experienced MP. What went wrong? What was the reason for your defeat?
I think there's a general mood at the moment to protest. It was clearly indicated in Mrs. Maddox's response, which was negative, unfortunately, I think, at the end of the count. As far as I'm concerned, we fought a very positive campaign. The government has got beyond Maastricht. I want them to put it behind us, behind everybody, really, and go on from there.
But it wasn't just Maastricht, was it?
No, it wasn't Maastricht, but it's a point of a combination of issues. No one voter you could identify as having rebelled for any particular one set of reasons. But the point is that and I think everybody accepts, commentators and politicians alike, that government has been distracted over the last few months over Maastricht and has not tackled or addressed or commented on or projected its views on a number of issues.
What could the government have done to have helped you win this campaign?
I think in the circumstances, post May the 6th, post Newbury, post the county council elections, it was always going to be extremely difficult. And until Maastricht was out of the way, then it was going to be extremely difficult to fight any by-election. Not because of Maastricht as such, but because people don't like a sense of disunity, and the government's got to pay attention to the issues other than that.
Well, what about VAT on fuel, the big issue? Should the government reconsider now?
You can't reconsider without actually providing an alternative. You've got to say where that money is going to come from. And this is what concerns me, is that it's very easy to make promises to people and say, we'll cancel this, we'll spend more on that, we'll spend more on the other. But you've got to identify where it comes from, where that money comes from. And when we go to the country at a general election, we do just that, and we've won general election after general election.
You haven't said they shouldn't reconsider.
No, what I'm saying is...
Should they keep that policy or not?
You have to, unless you can provide an alternative. There's been no alternative presented.
And your message to Mr Major tonight?
My message to Mr Major and to the Conservative Party at large is that we have put Maastricht behind us. We must now address issues in the future and go forward to win this seat and a majority at the next general election.
Do you want to fight here in the general election?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob Hayward.
Thank you very much, Mark, the defeated Conservative Party candidate. So let's have a last whip round with the gang of three here on my right. And who should start first? The person who lost his deposit, Jack Straw. Very briefly.
Well, it's an annihilation for the Tory party, and it has the paradoxical consequence of making the government so unpopular that we will be well set to win the next election. And that was the clear result, more importantly, of the Shire County elections, which took place not just in one part of the south, where we started from a very low pace, but right across the south.
Matthew Taylor.
It's amazing how getting 3% could be turned into a victory, and no doubt Norman will attempt to do the same thing for the annihilation the Conservative Party's suffered. I think we've agreed that there were 3 first-class candidates. All the candidates were good. The candidates weren't a problem for anybody. The messages were put across the electorate probably rather more than they would have liked. Endless leaflets, the messages were there. Therefore, the only thing this can be a verdict on is the leadership of the Prime Minister and the policies the Conservative Party has been following. And they have given a massive thumbs down. The real vote of confidence didn't take place last week in the House of Commons. It's taken place today. And the Conservative Party must learn the message of that. And in delivering that message, the electorate chose the Liberal Democrats and Diana Maddock.
Norman Fowler, your own people in Christchurch are saying to you, get rid of that VAT on domestic fuel. Get rid of it. Whatever else you do, if you do that, you have a chance of getting our vote. Are you going to walk out of the studio tonight without saying you'll think about that, you'll reconsider that, it ought to be looked at?
Yeah, well, I'm not in a position, nor would I want to be in a position, to actually seek to kind of change some policy on VAT. We've gone through this. We've had 10 minutes discussion on it, and the position remains the same, that the policy remains the same. As far as the by-election is concerned, I entirely concede what Matthew said, that this is a bad result for the Conservative Party. No one is seeking to deny that. I think it's a great sadness as far as Rob Hayward is concerned. But what I do say to you is this. I believe that what will happen at Christchurch is that what has happened at other by-elections that the Liberals have won, most of the by-elections that Liberals have won, and certainly virtually all of them since 1979, and that is that we will win it back at the general election. We will fight to regain our support. I regard this as obviously as a bad result. Obviously, we are going to have to consider all the implications of that. But what I say to you is that we will fight back on this, and we will win this constituency back.
Just a reminder then of the result of the Christchurch by-election yesterday, the result which came through 10 or 15 minutes ago, taken by the Liberal Democrats with a majority of 16,500, turnout of 74%, a huge, record-breaking swing away from the government, who had a 23,000 majority there last time, a huge fall in the Conservative vote, and a big victory, the biggest against a Conservative government, or indeed any government, in by-elections since records began. And the winner is Diana Maddock, who's celebrating down there at Christchurch, having walked the streets of Christchurch in the drizzle and the rain for 3 weeks, talking to people, trying to persuade them to vote for her, and she's now had this triumphant result. And goes to Westminster. Whether she'll stay there at the general election, we shall see. But in the meantime, it's just left me to thank the 3 politicians for coming in here, thank Peter Kellner and Robin Oakley for their analysis, Mark Mardell down there in Christchurch. There is a curious thing about Christchurch. It's got a very, very pretty harbour with a lot of boats in it. And the Admiralty pilot says about Christchurch that the one thing to be careful of is that when the tide goes out, it goes out very, very fast, at 9 knots. People who ever go in boats will know that 9 knots is really a stupendous tide. And it seems that that was the kind of pace that the tide went out for the Tories in Christchurch yesterday. From all of us here in the studio, A very good morning.